Okay, so I've never done one of these before, but I just watched that new ENOLA Holmes movie, and I absolutely needed to talk about it because it's something else, alright? So, ENOLA Holmes came out today, September 23rd, 2020, on Netflix, starring Millie Bobby Brown, Henry Cavill, and Sam Claflin. Those are the big names. The premise is Sherlock Holmes' younger daughter, ENOLA, is her own person, her own very smart, not like other girls, girl in 1880s England. And so her mother goes missing and she's got to go find her. But along the way, she meets this young lord who takes her on an adventure, and it gets in the way of her finding her mom or whatever. That's if you've seen the movie. If you haven't, go watch it and then come watch this, because I'm just gonna spoil everything right now. This is more of an opinionated review and commentary than anything else. Alright, starting off early on, it starts off with her in her big chateau house where she lives with her mother, because Sherlock and Mycroft Holmes, her older brothers, are significantly older than her. They're like a good 20 years, and they just left. So it's just her and her mom, who is played by Helena Bonham Carter. So her mother teaches her science, math, chess, martial arts, all in the hopes of making ENOLA like a fully fledged person and just very independent, because, ENOLA spelled backwards is alone. Very clever wordplay there. And so one day out of the blue, her mom disappears, and ENOLA's like, I have to find her because she's left me clues, and if I don't find my mom, then Mycroft is going to send ENOLA to a finishing school, a boarding school of some sort, so she can become a lady. And so we have to fight against the patriarchy in that way. And so one of my big issues with this movie is just the fact that it's attached to Sherlock Holmes' names. I've complained about this to everyone I've spoken to about this movie. The fact that they're saying they're taking a feminist spin on a classically male character, but they're choosing to make the character the younger sister of said character. So it's like, she's the female version of this character you already know. And so that really doesn't sit right with me, because it doesn't send the same message as if you had just created an original new character who just happens to be a detective, because that's new, that's exciting. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle does not own all detectives everywhere. He just happens to have written one of the most well-known ones. You can very well write a new type of detective. And so one of the things that I was equating this to was the fact that, like in Marvel, in the comics and in the MCU, the title of a certain superhero gets passed down to different types of people, like Captain America becoming from Steve Rogers to Sam Wilson. It's not, it's Black Captain America. It's not, Captain America's little brother version. No, it's his own person. It's its own entity. And the title of Captain America has been passed down, not just to Sam, but even in the comics, Bucky Barnes has his turn as Captain America. And so that's its own identity and its own thing, because it's not a character. It's an identity. It's just an identifier. Like with Spider-Man as well. In the most recent Into the Spider-Verse movie, Miles Morales is his own interpretation of the title Spider-Man. He's not Peter Parker. He's not related in any way to Peter Parker. He just happens to be Spider-Man now. And so that's very different than what they chose to do with this movie, because they've attached the name Sherlock to her. And literally in the movie, anywhere she goes and mentions detectives or her last name, everyone's first reaction is, you're related to Sherlock. Like Sherlock Holmes? And so that sets a precedent for her identity. And so yes, while that is a theme that she fights against throughout the movie, trying to be her own person, I don't like that that's what we chose to do as a symbol of empowerment for young girls. To be like, yes, you can also surpass and come out from under your older brothers, legacy and shadow. It just should have been her own person, this random 16-year-old girl who just happened to be very good at these things, and just no comparison to Sherlock at all. And so from there, I think it's very easy to have rewritten the entire script to just write out any of the Holmeses and just change Enola's name to something else and create an entirely new character. Because Sherlock doesn't really add anything. He's really not very present. He's very distant, even in the scenes he's in. I do know that the Netflix lawsuit that is occurring with the estate of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is because of the interpretation of Sherlock as too emotional and too kind, too emotional, supportive of women, something like that. I'll have to find a clip of whatever it said. But that is ridiculous, and honestly, kind of true. It's very jarring to see, like, stuffy, distant, but well-intentioned Sherlock being played by Henry Cavill just kind of, like, being like, oh, it really sucks for you, Enola, pat, that you're being sent off to boarding school because of Mycroft. Man, he really sucks. Too bad no one else like me, or I mean, not me, what? I could never help you, something like that. I don't like to get involved. I'm just a detective. And that's just a very stupid idea to me. Like, a lot of her problems could have been solved just like that. The movie chooses to make problems for the sake of furthering the plot when it doesn't really make any sense. There really was no need for Sherlock, or even Mycroft's presence. Mycroft is very much the antagonist in this movie. His presence symbolizes the patriarchy and just the repression of women, and that Enola has to fight against him to become her own person and to really distance herself and find her own identity as a Holmes when put up against these two. And so I didn't really like that. That was kind of lame. It was really heavy-handed with the whole, like, patriarchy bad, because we're in the middle of the suffrage movement in England or whatever, and, like, times are changing. That's a very big theme in this movie of, like, boomers of the 1880s are bad, and change is good, and women should vote. Wink, wink, vote, people. There's two specific moments in which the topic of voting is very much shoved in the audience's face. There's a moment when Mycroft and Sherlock are talking in, like, this, like, rich man's parlor, and Mycroft makes this comment about, like, nothing worse for a country than uneducated voters. And, like, you hear that, America? Be educated. Go vote. 2020. Please vote. So that was one moment. And there's another moment that Enola has where she has found this little warehouse where apparently they assemble for the suffragette movement. I don't really understand why we chose to do that, but it's happening. And she flips over this book, and it talks about the women's suffrage movement. It's a piece of banned literature. And Millie Bobby Brown gives the camera, like, a deadpan, like, do it, wink, wink, look. And it's just so jarring, and it's one of the clips they used in the trailer. And it made me laugh out loud from how uncomfortable I was that they just chose to have a moment of silence for her to look at the camera and be like, yeah, vote, moron. So that was something. They really go in with the whole, like, women are oppressed and we need feminism to make women equal, because what women don't want to do is, you know, womanly things of the Victorian era. And that's where I think they fail a lot in feminist themes, because I don't think it's a very feministic movie at all. It does not accomplish what they're trying, like what they said they wanted to do. They're trying to say that, yes, she's her own independent woman, she's a feminist, she fights girl power, she's just as good as any man, even an adult man. Okay, but where are her female friends? Where are any type of woman that she has a connection to besides her mother, who abandons her in the movie, where you have a woman genuinely helping her, like genuinely wanting to see her succeed, genuinely offering her sound advice and caring for her well-being. There is one scene where this black woman who teaches martial arts to other women in hiding secretly, that's the same thing, She teaches them self-defense, and she is a symbol of feminism and fighting and self-defense and advocation, la la la. But she doesn't really seem very forthcoming with useful information. She's just kind of like, hey, your mom's not here. I was the one who taught you how to fight. Remember that? Cool times. And, oh, you're just too bad you can't master that one martial arts move that I've clearly said you can't master. I hope that doesn't come in handy later. I hope on the third time you try it in the movie, it won't actually work. That's crazy. And just not really much help there. The black woman comes back for one more scene when she's confronted by Henry Cavill's character, and he's come because he's also following the clues, and it's led him to her. And so it's this very blatant, very Netflix advocation activist movement of like, wow, you don't vote and you don't care about politics because they don't affect you. Think about the rest of us. Check your privilege, white man. And it was kind of a lot. Kind of really in your face. They could have done more because apparently racism doesn't exist in this story because there's a lot of colorblind casting. And I'm saying colorblind because race does not get mentioned at any point in this movie. I know that colorblind casting is something that people don't really want to say anymore because they're like, no, like, you get cast regardless, but we're still paying attention to your race. That's not what happens here. What happens here, like, there is no racism. Racism does not exist in this universe. It's solely the white people are going after this white character as she finds her mother. That's it. And so they could have dug a little deeper if they wanted to really go for the activism route of like, yes, we're living like this message counts now even in 2020 in the modern times of like social disparities between classes. And of course the white upper class man will never fear the same things as the lower class people of color, but we don't mention that. We just say, oh, people like you, keeping it real above like surface level. That's a con for me, because they could have turned it into a more racial metaphor or even just confrontation of like, you as a white man specifically will never know what it's like for women or even women of color. I think that would have been pretty strong, but we don't go for that. Going back to the feminism points of her not having any friends, she also, there comes a point in the climax of everything is that she has been sent to the boarding school because she was caught because she sacrificed herself and got caught by the police, ACAB. She got caught by the police because she sacrificed herself for the boy so he could run away because his life is in danger, and she's like, it's fine, they'll just send me to boarding school, I can handle that. So she does get sent after this really like traumatizing scene of Mycroft shouting at her in this carriage, and she just, Millie Bobby Brown's acting right there was something else, because girl just breaks down into tears, and I was like, ugh, this is sending me back to my childhood. Anyway, and so she gets sent to the boarding school, and they make it very clear to you that she is not like the other girls in this montage of her just walking too slowly or being really shit at embroidering and being a messy eater, even though no one really eats in that exaggerated way. It was kind of like in Beauty and the Beast when the Beast is like to his soup. It's like, okay, no one really eats like that. And she doesn't get along with any of the other girls because for some reason we've chosen to really highlight the fact that ENOLA is just simply not like other girls in this time period, and that there is no way that any other type of thinking besides hers or the enemies who has been brainwashed by the patriarchy could ever feel. There's no one that falls in the middle, and then there's no one who can relate to her. Every other girl in the world that she comes across is perfectly willing to fall into the trap of repression and domestication by the patriarchy, apparently. And so she's struggling like that. Not the greatest message. Also, they really demonize feminine things in this movie. Like, she goes and she hates doing all of those things. She makes a big declaration about how she was not raised to like girly things. She was not raised to do typical feminine, wifely things. It's like, okay, I get it. You don't like embroidery. that's cool. You don't have to shit on everyone else who can and does. Yeah, that's how you know that this screenplay was written by a man, is the fact that men just really think that either you're a girly girl or you're like this tomboy, fuck all men type of feminist where you can't even indulge yourself in just traditionally girly things. Like, I don't know why we didn't just have her synthesize both sides of her and learn the abilities and then somehow use them in a way and reclaim them as like, yes, like embroidery came in handy in my feminist mission to do some kick-assing. Like, why couldn't that have happened? Instead, no, she goes on a big rant about, no, I'll never do those kinds of things because that means I'm submissive. And it's like, okay, let's just go for that route. So that was shitty. It's a man's perspective on what feminism is. Because she starts off the movie basically having disregard for men because there's flashbacks. There's so many flashbacks, okay? There's a couple of flashbacks where her mom's like, okay, like, think only of yourself. Self-preservation is key. Never let your well-being be sabotaged by anyone else, which is like, okay, you do you, girl. Like, that's kind of lit or whatever. That's a really cool way of thinking. But it's also super cynical, and it's not the right message to push for a 16-year-old in a movie for, you know, like teenagers. So they didn't stick to that. Instead, she comes to this realization moment of like, no, I can help other people. And so she does, which is why she goes on the quest to save the boy instead of finding her mother halfway through the movie. This movie is very long, 2 hours. Holy crap. And so she comes to that sort of realization. So there's a scene where he is helping break her out of the boarding school. And his great idea is that he sneaks in a woven basket type crate. And so he's like, okay, this is the big idea. Like, I'm gonna put you in here and I'm gonna drag you out. And she's like, okay, cool. So she climbs in the basket and everything's going well. He's dragging her into the hallway, and then as soon as that happens, the headmistress comes in, who is played by the same lady who plays Aunt Petunia in Harry Potter, Fiona Shaw. And so she comes down the hall. She's like, who the fuck are you? And he's like, oh, dude, I'm just a delivery guy. I have a package. This is a package for the headmistress. And she's like, I'm the headmistress. And it's just like this moment of like, oh, fuck, okay. It's for you from Mycroft. And so it's kind of gross because like the headmistress is in love with Mycroft, basically, who's like 30 years her junior. I don't know. But she's like in love with him. She's super thirsty for him or whatever. And she's like, oh, from Mycroft? Wow. And so she's like, oh, put it in my office. And so it's like an, oh shit, like she's gonna get caught kind of moment. And so she gets these people to go and put her in her office so she can walk in and open it later in private because she thinks it's gonna be some sort of sexy surprise for some fucking reason. And so while that happens, the boy escapes, and it's just a scene of the headmistress standing in the hallway after the girls have taken the suitcase away and gone. And then she goes in. And so then they cut to the inside of her office, and she opens up the suitcase, and there's only like a little drawing, a little caricature that ENOLA has drawn. And ENOLA is somehow already at the bottom on the ground, getting in the automobile. Like, they didn't even show us how she got out, how she climbed down the many stories of that giant building she was in to escape. She's just there now. She's gone. And we're just supposed to accept that. We didn't get to see any kind of like heist type funny hiding. You could have incorporated some sort of joke of her hiding around a desk as the headmistress comes in, escaping, funny things like that. Even having her see you as you get out of the window, I assume, would have been better. But no, we just get from, oh, she's in the basket, she gets put in the room, the headmistress comes in, she's suddenly not there anymore. She's just teleported downstairs. So I think that was a mistake in the editing because it didn't work like an ellipses. Ellipsis. It wasn't good. Like, you couldn't have been able to tell that, oh yeah, she escaped and we know this. It's like, okay, but how did she do it? And why didn't we get to see it? There was so much more potential there for that. So that was an editing thing that I didn't really like. Also, just, like, it should have been a shot. Like, it should have been incorporated at all. And it just wasn't, which was kind of lame. Another thing, just the matter of fact that the Holmes brothers are so irrelevant. Like, they don't make any sense. You could easily cut them out of the movie and nothing would happen. And it would be the same movie. You could just substitute them as different people. Because Mycroft, starting with Mycroft, he isn't really much of a brother to her. He could very well have been some random man. He could have been her uncle. We didn't have to incorporate the Holmes franchise into this, the canon of Sherlock Holmes. We didn't need that, because Mycroft could have been any old guy, any old random dude who just happens to be super sexist. We could have had that, and Sherlock could have been just non-existent. He didn't have to exist. He didn't really contribute anything of value to the plot. They had a couple moments where she's like, oh, like, why did you never call? What am I saying? Why did you never write? Why did you never visit? Like, I've been keeping all of your cases here to study them, and I'm like, I missed you or whatever, and we could have had a real connection. And he's like awkward, like, oh, like, no, I didn't know how. Oh. But to prove that he's a gentle, kind soul and still her brother and not some random man, they bring up this random memory that he has of her dragging this toy that she made herself, and it's supposed to be like this motif of sentimental value throughout the movie that gets called back later when he visits her when she is being basically held hostage at the boarding school, because he visits and he brings her the toy and he's like, wow, like, our mother had this under her pillow. She really does care about you, and so do I. Not enough to break you out of here, little bitch. But yeah, I do care about you, just because I'm saying I care about you. I haven't really shown it, but I do care. Aside from some non-committal statements I've made about how it sucks that you're being treated this way, and that, oh man, Mycroft, maybe this is kind of a dick move. He didn't really express any sort of affection towards her. And he brings her the paper. That could have happened easily if anyone else in the entire fucking boarding school had access to a paper, if they had paper delivered to them, if the headmistress happened to have paper on her desk, she could have easily found the newspaper and read the ciphers that her mother and her have together as a code. That could have happened. Didn't need Sherlock at all for that. He's literally just there for the clout he brings, for the legacy of Sherlock, and so we can have this ridiculous, I'm living in my brother's shadow narrative. And it's so stupid, because this easily could have been its own thing. I keep saying. We could have just edited everything with him out. Yeah, we could have just taken him right out the movie. Didn't need to happen. Mycroft could have been any old patriarchal bastard. We didn't need anything like that. Doesn't make any sense. Could have been her father. Could have changed the names. ENOLA, whoever. Doesn't matter. And it could have just been about the fact that she's a woman that is the underlying obstacle against her. Because so far, throughout the movie, it's like, you're a woman and you're related to Sherlock Holmes. Oh, you're so inferior. And, like, we underestimate you constantly. As if just being a woman back then wouldn't get you underestimated. Simple as that. We have to add on the fact that she's related to someone famous so we can have the extra bit of like, no, but I've got to carve my own path or whatever. Pave my own path? I don't know. It's doing too much for the sake of doing too much. And honestly, I don't think this needed to be adapted. This movie, this book, I mean, it didn't need to happen. We didn't need a female rendition of Sherlock Holmes. We've proved that female detectives can exist without being Sherlock Holmes. I mean, there's literally Nancy Drew. Nancy Drew is not like the cousin of the Hardy Boys. Why would we have another detective that just happens to be the sister of Sherlock? Why can't we just have another female detective girl and that's it? You know, like Mission Impossible, none of them, Tom Cruise's character, I've never seen those movies, but they have no connection to James Bond, who is like the spy that we all think of. And so no one would do that to a male character. And so just the fact that what is basically fan fiction got adapted into a movie when we could have just created an entirely new detective for young girls to relate to. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, why did we need that? And no offense to anyone who worked on this, obviously. These are all just nitpicks. I've never read the books that this was based off of. Really, my only experience with Sherlock is the BBC Sherlock. So, truly am not the expert here, because it's not like that was a great piece of art either. But it's just the little things like that when you're trying to say that this is a feminist film, or at least intending to uplift young girls, and you go and you pack it with all of these subliminal messages of like, oh, but in the end, though, you can't be a real feminist or really make your own way unless you're completely alone and have no support system. Because in the end, she is alone. She has been left, or has left, everyone in her life. She leaves the boy, which, like, cool, you didn't end up with the boy. I don't mind that. We didn't need to. Irrelevant. But her mom leaves her again, because her mom's like, I'm not done fighting my fight, girl. She doesn't want to stay with her brothers, because they're fucking dicks. Cool. But if she had made any sort of connection to anyone else, even, like, a girl, like, you can make girlfriends. You can also make girlfriends. But you didn't do that? You chose not to have a support system for her to fall back on. It was just, like, the thought of her mother that kept her going all this time, and the fact that the boy just turned out to not be as stupid as she thought he was. No. It's just silly. Like, she starts alone and she ends up alone. And not even in, like, a wow, like, that's really, like, narrative and, like, full circle ending. No, like, it doesn't teach you a lesson. She's just a 16-year-old unreasonably alone in Victorian England. It doesn't make any sense. I will say, one thing I do enjoy that was very funny was the fact that they were not afraid to beat the absolute shit out of Millie Bobby Brown. They absolutely went to town on beating the crap out of this kid. Like, ENOLA gets her shit wrecked. There's a scene where the bounty hunter guy ambushes her in this alleyway because he thinks that she's still with the Lord boy. And he starts, like, dunking her head in this bucket of water, this, like, barrel of water? There we go. And, like, is it waterboarding? I don't know. But he's drowning the life out of her. And it's so, like, jarring and graphic. Like, it's a PG-13 movie, but I just wasn't expecting the violence to all be leveled against her. I don't have a problem with it at all. I think it's absolutely fantastic, great for realism. I don't think anyone gave a fuck about beating up on some kid back then. They really don't now. But yeah, like, he tries to drown the life out of her. She escapes from that, and then they start, like, fist fighting in the street, and that leads into that warehouse that I was talking about, where she had discovered the voting book or whatever, and the fact that it was, like, an assembly place for deadly weapons, I'll say. There's a moment where he just whips out a knife, a little dagger, and stabs her in the gut. And you're supposed to be like, oh my god, like, she got stabbed. And then she just pauses, she backs away from him, and then, like, rips open her little dress bit where she got stabbed, which, okay, if I were attacking someone, I would not give them the courtesy of waiting for them to figure out what's going on with them. I wouldn't be like, oh, okay, you just take your time there. Let me just hold off on killing you so you can figure out why you're not dead yet. That doesn't make any sense. That's silly. I think it's so dumb when that happens in movies and TV. That's super stupid. But whatever. And so she opens up her little dress or whatever, and she looks, and it's the corset, the symbol of patriarchal oppression that has saved her. And so she looks directly at the camera. She mutters this witty one-liner or whatever, as she does the entire movie. Not a fan. And so it's like, wow, the symbol of female oppression from the patriarchy is what saved her from being stabbed. It's crazy. She's reclaiming it because she chose to wear the corset for her undercover mission. Not that she would want to wear it in any other circumstance for any other reason. Again, pushing the envelope really hard on the whole, I don't like things that men tell me to like, or that men have decided women should like, and that seems to phrase it in a poor way, but, like, women are allowed to like things that are stereotypically girly. Like, there are women who wear corsets now. We don't have to demonize them. We don't have to demonize people for wanting to dress how they want to dress. That's a tangent, though. That doesn't matter. She explodes the shop with him in it. Somehow he survives till the end for the final showdown. I do not understand how that is physically possible. I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention, maybe. But yeah, he lives through that, and so does she. And in the final showdown, once again, they're beating the shit out of her. And she's getting shot at with the boy because we've acquired guns now. That's cool and dandy. And so they're at the manor that the boy lives at. And he is being shot at by the bounty hunter man, who we still don't know who has sent him after them. And so they're running around in the dark because all the lights are off and it's the middle of the night, and they're getting shot at, and they get cornered by the man, and then she tries to fight him with the butt of his weapon in the temple, and she collapses. She's like gushing. She's gushing blood or whatever. And I'm like, no. She's out like a light, my guy. She's dead. She's got a tender little skull right here in the temple, not even here where the actual bone is. This is like the sweet spot. Like, you're out. But okay, we can't just kill off the female protagonist of the movie. Her name's in the title. And so she gets up from that pretty quickly after like this moment of flashbacks of her and her mother. There's so many flashbacks in this movie of her and her mother sparring, and her mom's talking to her, being like, yes, like, you can do it, like, just get up, be your own person, fight for other people, fight for yourself. And so then she army crawls over to the bounty hunter, and she perfectly executes the martial arts move that she had failed twice before, because third time's the charm. And we were foreshadowing that the entire time, in case you weren't aware. She executes it, she brains him, he absolutely blunt force trauma, he has passed away, and we don't acknowledge the emotional baggage of that, or how that affects her in any way. She has just murdered a guy, but we don't care. And then it turns out it was the grandmother of the boy all along! Wow! Really pushing like the fuck all boomers and change is good agenda theme. I'll call it a theme, to be gentle. The theme of change being good and the old ways being bad, or at least too constraining. So then the grandma comes and she's like, yes, like, I did it. It was me, because the newfangled things all of you are getting up to are bad for the country. I said it. I own this estate, and it's my job to keep the estate the same way it was, because change is bad, and I hate change. So I would rather kill my own grandson than allow change in the country to happen, because it turns out the grandson had voting power as a lord, so he had influence in the fate of the country. Once again, vote. Please vote. And so that turns out to be her whole thing, her whole motive, her whole reason. And so she shoots her grandson in the chest, and he goes down like a little sack. It's supposed to be like this really like emotional moment, like, no, you've killed him. But he's fine. Turns out he's fine. He lived. He was wearing a plate of armor because there happened to be suits of armor in this fancy ass house that he lives in, and so he just slipped one on without the audience noticing. And he put it underneath his coat. He somehow managed to do that. And so he's all right, and she's all right, and we're all right, which is fantastic. And there's a moment after that, we fast forward a little bit. Mycroft and Sherlock are like, oh, well, like, let's meet up with her in the plaza. So Sherlock leaves her a little encoded message in the newspaper, pretending to be the mother, but she's like, I know this is not my mom. We shouldn't use the code word, bitch. But she shows up anyway in disguise, yet again, outfit change. And she doesn't go up to them, she ghosts them, and they're like, man, what a tricksy little girl, what the fuck? And Sherlock's like, oh, I'll take her as my ward since you don't want her. And Mycroft undergoes no character development. He stays in his old way thinking of the patriarchy. Doesn't matter. Whatever. I don't really care about his character. I don't really care about Sherlock. Obviously, she doesn't go with him because she is independent and alone, as her name says. And she doesn't need to be beholden to any man, even a guardian, because 16 is a perfectly reasonable age to be living alone in the streets of London, I guess. And so, yeah, she ghosts him, leaves her little toy as a calling card. Doesn't really make much sense. Could have cut that whole scene out. Didn't really add anything. We didn't need any sort of conclusion with them. They didn't need to happen. like I said. And the movie ends with her basically saying goodbye to the little lord boy. And he offers her a place to stay. She's like, no, I don't want to live with you because, again, we're not beholden to men. And she leaves, but not before getting her hand lightly kissed by the boy. And she does a really strange, like, swoon sigh. I was like, why did we choose to have that happen? That's a little weird. But it happened. And no, she didn't want that. So she goes off on her own way. And she returns to her in-room place, her hotel. And her mom's there. I have to give Millie Bobby Brown props, though. The look she gives to the side of the camera is so well done. Oh, I love that so much. That was so nice. It's just like this shock, this like gut-wrenching shock that she gives in her expression. It was so good. Props to her. Love you, Millie. Because the camera's facing her and you're supposed to be wondering, like, oh my god, like, who's she looking at? And of course it's her mother. Her mother snuck in to say like a last goodbye of sorts, of like, oh, sorry I ghosted ya, but I swear it's because I'm fighting for our rights. And so that's supposed to make it okay. And they have a little moment of like mother-daughter-ness, and that happens, blah blah blah, doesn't matter, go watch the movie. And basically after that, she has this little monologue as she's on a bike, or about to be on a bike, riding away, where she's like, I'm not like my brothers, I'm not like Sherlock, I'm my own person, I'm ENOLA, and I'm these 3 different things, and it's my turn to tell my own story and find out who I really am. As if the movie wasn't supposed to be about that, but I guess not. And so she rides off into the London horizon of the town. We tilt up, we pan up, whatever you want to call it, to the smoggy streets of old London that they've so generously, horribly CGI'd for us. And that's how the movie ends, baby. That's how it ends. Overall, it's a fun movie, I will tell you that. It of course, it has its flaws. It's Netflix. What did you expect? But at the same time, I don't expect it to be anything more than what it is. And I don't hate it for that. I will roast the hell out of it, of course, but that's just me being insufferable. And so I do think it's a nice movie. It's a good time. There was a lot of love put into at least the wardrobe. I like it a lot. Millie Bobby Brown did an excellent job. I feel like the 2 male leads of the big name ones they weren't really giving me much. But I guess if you want, distant, cold, strong man, Henry Cavill's your man. Not really. It wasn't really for me. He didn't really add anything. Like I said, Sam Claflin, though, he did a really good job scaring the life out of me when he fucking yelled at Millie in the carriage. It traumatized me, sent me back. That was a really good chemistry between them two of the bickering. The male lead, the younger boy, I have to look up his name. Let me see. Louis Partridge. He did a nice job. His role mainly consisted of like semi-sassy, soft-spoken one-liners and just really fond looks at Millie Bobby Brown. So, I mean, good job. I don't know. If this is his first movie? Is this his first movie? No, it's not. Okay, this is probably his most well-known movie. So you really can't fault him on that. Good for him. He's alright. They have good chemistry. They have a really nice back and forth. I'll give him that. One thing, though, I do not enjoy the constant fourth wall breaks. That's just not a thing for me. I don't enjoy it. Also, the overuse of narration. Not a fan. That's not for me. Some of the looks she gives the camera are funny, but at other moments, it's like, okay, like, I'm watching. You know I'm watching. You're aware that I'm here. I'm the audience. you don't have to give me like a, haha, boy says funny, soft, unexpected thing. And she's like, oh my God, like, audience, can you believe he said that? Like, girl, I know, I'm watching. Stop. I know. Another thing, aside from the story, I feel like I've dug into the story quite a bit. Another thing that really irks me is the CGI. You're telling me you can't animate a moving train to look any more realistic than it did in that movie? You're telling me you can't animate Millie Bobby Brown sitting in a fake tree on a long shot with Henry Cavill sitting at the root of the tree? Why does it look like Spider-Man 3 with these CGI visual effects? What is this? Coming from like an animation background, someone who's studying and knows people studying animation, I'm not the end-all know-all on animation in any way. I feel like with such a big budget movie with so many big budget names, you would think that you could figure out how to make the animations look a little better, the CGI, not necessarily animation. But yeah, the visual effects, like, sometimes they're super wonky. Like, there's a scene where she's wearing a veil, like a widow's veil, in one shot, and she sticks her head out the carriage window, and the wind is blowing, and you can tell it's a CGI veil then, because it just contorts, like sticks to her face super strangely. I don't know if it actually was a real veil, but if it was CGI, which it looks a lot like it was, it looks so jarring. I don't know if it was not translating well onto my screen, but it just looks so weird. It looked like a weird, like, tarp sticking to her, like a second skin. Not at all like how a real veil or even mesh would look like pressed against your face. And then the trains looked really bad. Sorry, they looked really bad. Like moving trains. There were a lot of moments where you could really tell that they were just standing, like sitting, just stagnant as a green screen was behind them. There's a scene where they're in like this automobile riding off to their destination, her and the boy whose name I literally do not understand what it is. I don't know how to say it. Starts with a T. Is that his first name? I don't know. But they're in a carriage and there's no wind. Nothing is telling me that they're moving other than the green screen behind them and the very awkward like shake of their shoulders to mimic motion. And so that looked really strange because anyone's hair would be moving. Even if it's not a windy day, when you move, the air pushes against you, and so your hair will move. And so it's just the little things that just ruin the realism. It's just a nitpick. But it's a Netflix movie, as I keep saying. You would really expect there to be more attention to detail, especially when some of the production design in like the castle and the internal settings, the interiors is really well done. Like the castle, the chateau area where she lives is really beautiful, like her house. The landscapes that they chose to shoot on are very gorgeous. The manor where the Lord lives, also amazing. It's when they get to some like city, old London town shots is when you can really tell that the CGI kicks in, because obviously nothing looks like that anymore. This is 2020. London doesn't look like that now. But they just didn't really animate it that well. Like, it's a stark difference between what may have been a set and then what becomes what they animate, because obviously that open air above doesn't exist. And so it gets visual effects. And they don't always look the best. They look very strange. And it's just weird. Like, you'll have a good moment, and, like, the costumes are great. Do I know if they're historically accurate? No. Are they impeccable, though? Do I think their fits are fantastic? Yes. Would I wear every single one of those outfits? Yes. Both the male and the female outfits that she goes through, this girl goes through like 12 different outfits, to the point where it becomes kind of like a little mental tally, because you can't stop noticing how much she keeps changing her outfits. Like, she cross-dresses, like, 5 different times. She gets, like, 7 different, like, frilly dresses. She gets a couple, like, frock things of, like, this is my peasant just chilling out dress. She's in her, like, underclothes in one moment where it's just, like, a linen sheet over her. Like, she goes through so many outfit changes. The costume department must have gotten so much funding. Good for them. They're so pretty. I don't know if they're historically accurate, like I said. Do I care? No, they don't really seem to care. It doesn't look like they were going for 100% authentic realism. Another moment that makes me question that is they mentioned the Ritz Hotel, because they're hiding out in this inn room or whatever, and the boy makes this fucking argument of like, oh, like, it's a little shitty in here or whatever, and she's like, oh, sorry, I didn't book a room at the Ritz. And I stopped, I paused what I was doing, and I looked up when the fucking Ritz was established, because I was like, wait, how old is the Ritz Hotel? And I looked it up. It looked like it was in the 1900s, so I don't know how to look shit up, or if they did that on purpose and just made it anachronistically a thing on purpose, or if they just fucked up and included that in the script. I guess I'll have to look that up again, but that didn't make any sense to me. I was very confused. I was like, the Ritz escaped the bounty hunter that's after the boy, because yes, he's being chased by a literal bounty hunter. They run away, and they're like camping out in a field or in the woods or someplace in the wilderness. I can't name. I don't go outside. And they're building a fire, and she starts sharpening a knife, and she just hacks his hair off. She just hacks it off, which would have been okay, cool, whatever. But he ends up with this distinctly modern 2020 21st century type haircut, which is the actor's real hair, and it just threw me off so bad, because I feel like that is just not accurate for someone of his standing as a lord, or even just the era that they're in. It didn't make much sense to me. Why is he suddenly groomed like he got snatched out of the 21st century and plopped into 1880s England? I don't know. But not even that. Not even the fact that it's a drastic haircut that looks like it could have been styled by any TikToker. It's the fact that his hair in the beginning is like this auburnish, maybe like dark reddish brown. But then when we see him again, he is a pure dark brown brunette. Boy changed hair color. He darkened 5 shades. And I'm like, okay, I could understand you cutting his hair with a sharpened knife, but how are you going to explain to me how he dyed his hair? You can't. It doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing that? I'm not stupid. Why have we just decided that is what's happening? It doesn't make any sense. Honestly, it threw me out of the loop. I lost my place. My suspension of disbelief was unsuspended for a second, because I was like, what? This boy looks like he could be walking across the street from me right now, and I shouldn't be thinking that. I should be immersed. And no, he looks like a cosplaying TikTok boy. So that threw me for a loop. That seemed like a costuming error on their behalf. So there's a lot of excessive moments of her looking at the camera and having like a witty gaze or like a snarky look on her face, when it just didn't need to be. I understand it's to underscore whatever's happening in the conversation or in the world around her, but it just gets to a point where her looking as he says something witty or smart or really nice, or like it's just simply foolish or something, she'll look at the camera like, oh my god, like, can you believe the patriarchy? Can you believe the society I'm in? Can you believe every other person in this room? God. Or she'll have like a soft look like my god, isn't he dreamy? Like, yeah, okay, I get it. No, they have good chemistry. I'll give them that. There's also a moment throughout the film when Sherlock is visiting Enola at the boarding school, where he's kind of beating around the bush about like, oh, have you solved the mystery yet? Like, la la la, like, look for the clues, pep talk, whatever. But the movie almost makes it seem like he's already solved it himself, which completely undermines the entire message that they're going for. And while I don't know if that was actually what was happening within the screenplay itself, that he's meant to already know who it is, the fact that it could be misconstrued as that shows a writing error, at least in my opinion. It shows that you don't really know what to do with that scene, which is another point as to why it shouldn't exist. Why that should have just been cut. We didn't need that. He didn't help at all. Could have been cut. Unnecessary. And then towards the end, when he's talking to, I think it was Lestrade, he is talking about like, oh, like how could your sister have found that out before you? And so then I'm like, wait, so did he find out? Like, he was like, how did she get there before you? And I couldn't tell if they meant literally to the location of the crime, or how did she get to the solution before you, and how did she figure it out before you? That didn't really make any sense to me. It confused me, and again, I'm not a stupid person, so I don't know if it ended up being a communication error between the screenplay and the movie and me, of like, oh, like this wasn't clear. They didn't make it clear enough. So that's a thing. So all in all, fine movie. Go watch it. Of course, it has its drawbacks. I don't think it's the best thing Amazon. I don't think it's the best thing Netflix has ever come out with, production-wise, or even message-wise. It's not the best movie they've come out with. But it's not unwatchable. It's no cuties. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. Like, you should watch it for all it says. I mean, just know that it's still flawed. The messages about feminism are very much written by a man, told by a man, and shot by a man, because the director, the screenwriter, and the cinematographer are all men. Pretty sure. So that definitely influences. People like to say that doesn't influence the integrity of a movie or the messages, but it says a lot that 3 men are trying to tell the story of a young girl and painting her as a feminist when men have a very limited view of feminism. So, thoughts on that? That is the end of this. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully I make more of these.